We're back with Sudbury Politics, the show, featuring hosts Jeff McIntyre and Richard Eberhardt. This week's special guest is a candidate for the next federal election who does politics for all the right reasons. Mike Morrice is the Green Party's nominee in the Southern Ontario riding of Kitchener Centre and is his party's best hope in Ontario. Jeff and Richard talk with Mike about the challenges and opportunities facing the Greens and how to do politics differently and better. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Sudbury Politics, the show. Welcome back, everyone, to Sudbury Politics, the show. We had a really special episode today. I'm very excited to see an old friend of mine here on the show. We have a great guest. He is seeking the Member of Parliament seat in Kitchener Centre. He is a Green Party candidate. I believe that he's celebrating his nomination on the 27th of May coming up with what's sure to be as wild of a party as an online party can get. And I know him best, and I'm sure some folks in Sudbury know him as well from the work that he did starting from when he was right out of school as the founder, the brainchild behind an organization which is now called Green Economy Canada, with Sustainability Collab before that, and before that it was Sustainable Waterloo Region, and it just continues to grow across the country with his vision. He ran an amazing campaign in 2019. We talked about it in our election roundup. And then we heard some really amazing news that during the campaign, Mike was suffering from a form of cancer and had to power through on that campaign. And I know many candidates wouldn't have done that, but there was a real shot to win that seat. And I think that basically the returns showed a 10-fold increase in the Green Party vote, the strongest Green Party showing in Ontario. And so it's our great pleasure to have Mike Morrice with us this afternoon on the show. Welcome, Mike.
Oh, Richard, thanks to you and to Jeff for having me and for the kind introduction. I've been looking forward to the conversation, and yeah, thanks. This is really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Obviously, big changes in the Green Party. For the first time in a long time, a new leader, and again, doesn't have a seat in Parliament, which you guys started getting used to. So what does that mean for the Green Party going into the next federal election? You did well in Ontario, but your leader is not necessarily running in the easiest seat in Toronto. What does that mean for the party?
Well, I guess you asked about the leader first of all. So in Aeasia's case, I was pretty impressed with how she did in the by-election in Toronto Centre just back in October. To go from, I think it was 9% or so in the 2019 election, and then just I think it was 32% or so in the by-election. And of course, you would know better than most that by-elections aren't always the exact metric to be measuring for future elections. But I think it showed there was a real response in her community to the fact that she stayed in Toronto Centre as leader, and maybe even more importantly, the things that she is speaking about, and that others across the party and that we've spoken about quite a bit in Kitchener Centre as well, are resonating with folks. Whether that's guaranteed livable income or prioritizing mental health as health, whether that's science-based action on climate change. I think that's what's important. And that's why I'm optimistic for her in the next election. Certainly in our case here in Kitchener Centre. I think you might see a few other spots across the country where, and this is, on the East Coast, right across over to Vancouver Island, of course, where there's opportunities where communities you've seen in past elections have demonstrated that green candidates have earned their trust to some extent and are kind of positioned to break through. And I think with Aeasia's leader, there's a real excitement across the party, and again, particularly in Kitchener Centre, just a lot to build on.
So, Mike, I know you. I've watched your campaign. I think basically from the first I heard that you were planning to run in what was a contested nomination at the time. But I don't know much about Aeasia Paul. I watched a Ryerson Democracy Forum session with her and Martin Red-Cohn the other day, which was interesting. I listened to her on David Hurley's podcast called The Hurley Burley. Also interesting. I can't get a read on Aeasia Paul. Have you spent a lot of time with her? What can you tell us about her?
Yeah, well, we were both candidates together in 2019. So we spent some time in that election together. At one point, we were in Toronto filming a commercial back in September. And we've gotten to know each other in some of the time since, even post campaign, there was a few important conversations that she was a part of. She's been a member of Shadow Cabinet for some time, and she has held over the years significant, quite a bit of respect in the party. And so when I was looking to kind of break in and earn the respect and trust of a number of folks in the party, she was someone that I was kind of looking to for guidance throughout. And so I think, again, one of the things that drew me to the party is a lot of, I think, what she holds as well, a focus on democracy first and foremost. She was one of the first to say in the leadership campaign that the role of the party leader is not to set policy and overall direction, but to be a spokesperson, to be one who is listening to party members and to their community as well, and to be able to bring a message related to green values and green policies to a wider audience across the country. And that's what I see her doing so well. Her bilingualism, for example, and her ability to be engaging with the Francophone media, I've been so impressed with. Her focus on her community, her focus on, again, ensuring that Greens represent people first and party second. These are some of the things I've been, and just her genuine, when she's speaking with the media, I feel like I can really connect with her. And that there's not just the talking points, I guess. And that matters a lot, right? In all of our, I think that the two things, right? Turning down the mudslinging and the attacks, and then actually focusing on providing solutions and doing so in a way that can actually, meaningfully connect with folks. And so that's some of what I've been seeing from her in the time since elected. And then again, to your question in terms of who she is as a person, yeah, she's a friend. She's someone that I look up to. And that's probably why I supported her in the leadership race is I think this is the kind of leader that can grow the number of folks across the country who are hearing from the party, hearing about the policies, and to speak about them in a way that I think might connect more widely.
So it's kind of been a historical norm in Canada for green policy to eventually get eaten up by other parties in a mass stand, right? So price on carbon came out of the Green Party. UBI was talked by a lot of different parties, but the Greens were the ones really hammering it home for a long time. Now it's becoming more of the normal conversation. But more on the environmental side, as the Green Party, core value of responsibility for the environment starts getting taken up by the Liberal Party, by the NDP party, and now we're even hearing, finally, some kind of green platform from the Conservative Party. We can argue about degrees. Does the Green Party need to define itself more outside of the environment?
Well, thanks for that, Jeff. First of all, I'll add one more. In 2019, there was a number of folks in my community who were concerned with the Greens' position on decriminalization as a result of looking at the number of opioid overdoses and preventable deaths from those overdoses across the country. And to go from, I think Greens were one of, if not the first, to be calling for decriminalization, to this past summer, the Chief of Police Association calling for decriminalization. Look how quickly some things can change, right? And so I think that is a point of pride to be focused again on the policies first and foremost. And I'm not concerned with whose name is on the bill. This is why pharmacare, I think, is held up there. I'm sure, the most recent pharmacare bill my sense is it wasn't supported because of the parties whose name was on it, and that's not right. That's not what our democracy should be about. And so I think we can do better, and that's why I think some of those policies are important to be putting forwards. So that's some of what we've already seen done. To go back, Jeff, can you remind me the first part of your question again?
Well, mostly I was looking at, how does the party define itself as the other parties move themselves more in line with green policy on the environment?
Well, so yeah, thanks. So on climate, first of all, I think it's important to recognize the gap that still exists. And so I'm thrilled to see things like carbon pricing. When we started Sustainable Water of the Region a decade ago, part of the hope was that we might see more parties even talking about whether it's cap and trade or a carbon tax. The reality now that, yes, we're seeing carbon pricing talked about more widely, the gap that remains is it doesn't matter that the current government's climate plan is superior to that of the Harper government, for example. The benchmark that matters is the science. And so we need all parties to be working together to put forward not just targets, but plans to meet those targets that follow the science. And that's where it's nonpartisan. It's crystal clear. It's coming from young folks. It's coming from Indigenous people. It's coming from scientists. We need to follow the science on climate. We need to do it now. We need to move decisively because we've wasted. Emissions have gone up. We're now the largest emitter, or the only one in the G7 whose emissions continue to rise. And so we need to turn the corner on climate. And I'm proud to be part of a party that continues to kind of lead the way in terms of providing science-based plans in terms of taking action on climate change. When I look at why I chose the Greens, yes, seeing strong policies on the environment is important. For me, the values of the party were even more important, and the climate plan is just kind of aligned with the values of the party. And again, this focus on democracy first and foremost, that there's no whipped votes amongst Greens. And so what I'm speaking with you about this afternoon, I don't need to just give you a party talking point. And that's true for elected MPs as well. And should I have the opportunity to represent my community as a Green MP, will continue to be the case. And so when I look at the core of what it means to be a Green, to me, it's about integrity. And back to Richard's question about Aeamia's role as leader, and I think mine as well, is to be able to communicate about a far wider range of topics and recognize the intersections across. And so in Kitchener Centre, the top 3 priorities I heard across tens of thousands of doors, number 1 was healthcare and mental health in particular. And also the reality, there's significant gaps. We say universal healthcare, but without dental, as an example, without mental health, without pharmacare, the reality is it's not actually universal healthcare. Housing is the next. In Kitchener, it's a 35% increase the last year alone in house prices, while income is flatlined. We need ambitious policy on housing at all levels of government, significant investments in construction of public subsidized co-op housing, ending the blind bidding process. The list goes on. And so I think it's important for us to be speaking about this wider mix of policies that reflect both what people like myself are hearing in communities like Kitchener Centre, as well as the values of the party. And then recognizing that these things are all interconnected. A person who doesn't have access to transit, for example, who needs to then, to get to their second job and needs to then buy a car in order to do that, we're not going to blame that person for then increasing their emissions. We need to be putting in place policies that provide ways for folks to live affordably, in ways that have good access to transit, for example, and we need to take care of people's health. So that's my sense, Jeff. But I don't think Greens have done a great job of that over the years. And I heard that the doors, it's baked into the name of the party. I think it's always been seen as, okay, this is the party that will allow us to make meaningful progress on climate. And I think that's, again, something that I've seen more and more from Aeamia. and you'll see it from folks like myself. If folks check out my blog, it's mikemorrice.ca/blog, and the priorities that we speak about, I speak about there and online, you'll see a wider mix. And again, the recognition that these things are, it's not your priority is more important than mine, but these things are all interconnected.
The sense I get, Mike, is that the Greens absolutely have a shorthand. There's a brand. The brand is baked right into the color. It's baked right into the name. And you just sort of mention it. And what I hear when I hear you effectively laying out what is essentially a localized platform, I think that's super effective. But it's also 300 times more work across the country to be able to express localized messaging in every riding and constituency in Canada. And what you'll end up having is a very difficult time maintaining consistency between what the leader's message is delivering at the leaders' debates and a national messaging, and candidates like yourself who are able and have both the team and the resources and the wherewithal to understand and know your communities and represent those large issues in your communities, and then a whole bunch of other Green Party candidates across the country who, for lack of capacity, for lack of resources, can't articulate those messages, don't know those messages, can't assess what's important in their communities, and so end up sort of, like not knowing what to say. And I've seen them move back to the sort of the standard branding, which is about why our climate change plan isn't good enough and why it needs to be better. And when you look at the opinions, the opinion polling, like 80% of New Democrat supporters and 80% of Green supporters agree, grafting right onto each other, that more needs to be done. 76% of Liberal voters feel the same way, and only like 30% of Conservative voters feel that way. They really pack the three progressive parties on one side and then the Conservatives sort of sticking it on the other side. My point here being, is it possible to run a national green campaign that has meaning, that goes beyond the climate? And how do you in your work in Kitchener Center contribute to that national campaign? Do you take anything from the national campaign? Because I know the campaigns that I've seen are gobbling up centralized messaging and throwing the centralized messaging out. Because why? Because it's easy, it's consistent, there's one solid message. The sense I get is that you're able to make your own message, and it's stronger and it's more effective. But is it nationalized? Is it able to be deployed coast to coast?
So most importantly, democracy's hard work. That's a fact. It should be hard work. If someone is seeking to represent 100,000 people, there is no shortcut to doing that well. And that's going to require thousands of conversations if any person from any party is going to earn the trust of their community, and then be able in turn to represent the interests and the common ground that that person may have heard from their community well in Ottawa. What's also true, the point I think you're getting at, is that I think it's important for any party, and Greens as well, to have clarity of message in terms of what are the top priorities across the party. And I'll be honest, in 2019, it's not like we had the party platform here and the Kitchener Center priorities over here. I think the reality of what we ended up doing was we knew there was a fulsome platform, and answering your question, what Elizabeth needed to do and I think did was, every day there was another element in that platform that she was speaking to, climate being one of dozens. In Kitchener Center, we took that platform and said, okay, here's the top 5 things we're hearing. We're going to focus on these 5 elements that, yes, are in the platform. And also, these are the realities of what folks in Kitchener Center are telling us most often is most important to them. And at times we might say we need to go a step further. Again, I don't want to just be a mouthpiece for the party. This is about representing community first and foremost. But ultimately, again, that top 3 I shared before, all 3 were in the party platform. We just accentuated that because that's what our community was talking about. And that's the reality of folks' lived experience here. And so that's when a person, I think, selects a party that aligns with their values, that all becomes a whole lot easier, right? There's just no politicking to be done. I agree with the platform because the platform's is informed by the values of the party, which are my values.
So to that, like, and this is probably one of the reasons why I don't support the Green Party is the lack of consensus building. It's very much regionally organized on a national party scale, which makes it very difficult because, you say I align with a party that that I agree with. Well, how do I know that I agree with the party when there isn't that kind of central tenet to it to say, this is who we are, this is where we stand on a variety of issues beyond the environment, to know that, if I'm voting to support the Green Party, well, what does that mean for Green Alberta or Green BC or Green Northern Ontario? Because I don't know that the candidate in Southern Ontario is going to align with the values of the candidate in Northern Ontario. And I might lose out on, an important policy to Northern Ontario because rest of Green Canada doesn't agree with my local candidate.
Yeah, it's a fair critique, Jeff. I think what you're making me think about is how I choose my closest friends. And if I think about my 5 closest friends, if you think about your 5 closest friends, I'm not sure, their position on policy X or Y this year or the next. But I know their values. I know what they are about. And I think we've become close over the years because our values are so similar. And that allows us to have respectful conversations when we might disagree on X or Y, recognizing that we're coming at it with a shared interest. And maybe that's a way to think about, at least how I see my affiliation with the Green Party. Those values inherently mean there are some policies that no Green MP will support. So, for example, all Green MPs are supportive of expanding women's reproductive rights. That is as a result of policies or the values of the party, nonviolence being one of the values of the party, for example. And so I think if you're looking as a voter at, what can I expect from my green candidate, if most folks might not have as much time to engage as we are here. And so folks can look at the platforms and make their comparisons. But ultimately, for those that are looking to go a bit deeper, I think it's the values that we can align on. And that's what, when I look at Paul in BC or Jenica in Fredericton, that's what I appreciate about them is I know our values are the same, and I know that they are going to be representing their interests of their constituents within the boundary conditions of those values, I guess.
Mike, I want to have you have a chance to inspire your Northern Ontario colleagues. I mean, we've got you on the show. It's not like we didn't reach out to some Sudbury-based or Northern Ontario-based Greens. We didn't do a big poll across of every single person who could be on the show because I kind of just wanted to talk to you. So we just cut right through it because I think you have a message that the others don't. In fact, I don't know a single non-incumbent politician who's had the ability to engage her or his community as effectively as you have in the lead up to this election. We know there's an election coming. Even before they started beating the drums like what, February, you'd already kind of established that from 2019 to now, you're carrying on with this journey. And you told me something as we kind of prepped for this, that you're setting yourself up, in much the same way that you think the MP for your riding should be behaving. Can you tell us more about that? Because I think it's great, and I think everyone should be doing kind of what you're doing in their own communities.
Well, thanks for that. Well, I'll go back to kind of coming out of the election. As you mentioned, I was diagnosed with stage 1 testicular cancer in August of 2019. And so coming out of the election, I had a surgery the week after. And so if I'm honest with you, it took about 6 months to kind of process the election, work through, post surgery. And I was actually pretty quiet. I wasn't on social media. I had a number of good conversations with friends and family to, best understand what we had all been through together, and then also start to process what might come next. And I'm really grateful for that time, for those 6 months or so. And I was very intentional that when I shared about my cancer journey with the media, I knew that would be part of kind of reemerging in the community again. And by the time I did share that was May of, I guess, yeah, just about a year ago, May of 2020. The support I felt from my community more widely when that news got out was just incredible. It really meant a lot. Moving forward from that point, my interest was to not think about the next election. I want to be making choices that align with my values today. And I had just spent the last year plus learning about the priorities of my community and building my platform. And so it felt kind of intuitive in terms of what would bring me joy, was to continue to use that platform and my understanding of the priorities to engage in my community on those things. And so I took a part-time role at Wilfrid Laurier University. I really enjoy engaging with young people. And so I'm coaching and supporting young social entrepreneurs that are looking to take any of their ideas around making the world a better place, ecologically, socially, and bring those ideas to life. And then also continuing to put a spotlight on the priorities that I heard, which again, is a far wider mix, everything from working to end gender-based violence, to the opioid crisis, to resettling refugees, and what more we need to be doing to be a more welcoming community here in Waterloo region and across the country as well. And so my check along the way, even before I'd made the decision to run again, was that regardless of that choice, am I being genuine in how I'm engaging in my community in ways that are actually serving the priorities and the folks that I'd heard from and built relationships with, and that's meant I've really enjoyed the last year of that engagement, and now that I have decided that I'm both in good enough health and that I think it would serve the community to continue to build on what we started in 2019. I think, yeah, to your point, some folks I've had them come to me and say, "I thought you already were our MP," and like, what a compliment, right? That to me means that myself and folks on the team have been focused in the right ways in serving our community, serving our democracy, putting those folks who are on the front lines in the spotlight where the spotlight should be, and using my platform in ways that best serve. And so if that started to come through to you, and you've kind of seen some of that, Richard, that means a lot. And it's good affirmation that that's where we're going to continue to put our time and energy. Again, in a minority, we don't know when. Who knows when the election might get called? You and Jeff may have, a sense, being pretty close to the political conversations. But for my part, I'm going to continue building relationships, serving my community as best I can. And that means I'm really enjoying it, I guess, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
So on that, being election ready means a bit being leadership ready. and being, I guess, party structure ready. You wrote a letter that was called out the party brass pretty significantly. Where's the party at today, and where does the party need to move to get where it needs to be ready for an election?
Well, so that's a larger question. I'll start with, you mentioned this letter, and for listeners who might not be familiar, I'll just give a bit of if that's okay, Jeff, I'll give some context on this. Yeah. So there was a series of articles in the Toronto Star starting around the beginning of April that shared the experiences of a number of racialized folks in the party, and some concerns that they had shared, as well as not just racialized folks, Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks across the party. And so I was, concerned reading of that, but then also in the weeks that followed, with the response that I heard, particularly from a number of members on our federal council, which is the board of the federal party. And that didn't reflect to me the kind of leadership on anti-racism in particular that I aspire for our party, that I think follows our values. And so to me, this isn't even about, we can talk about election readiness. It's something I enjoy talking about, both at the local level and for the party as a whole. But in this way in particular, whether there's an election coming up or not, this to me just shook my confidence in our federal council. And I recognize that I have influence in the party. And particularly over the last number of years, there's been kind of my own reflection on how I best use the influence I have towards ensuring that the spaces I'm a part of are, working towards and taking actions that reflect an anti-racist lens. And I just didn't feel that was the case here. So I started having a number of conversations within the party, and started to communicate my concerns within the party over several weeks, while also listening to and centering the voices of a larger number of Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks. And it was through those conversations with some of the folks that were named in those articles, and with Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks across the party. That's what then led to when I didn't feel, and there's of course a second person in that letter. So Anna Keenan, who did an incredible job in Malpeque PEI, earning the trust and support of her community. And similarly, Anna has a considerable influence within the party as well. We both felt that this was an appropriate moment to leverage the influence we do have to call for change. And I'm optimistic that as a result of the number of folks that have spoken up, that we're going to see some change on federal council. We need to create space for a wider set of voices, folks who have stronger anti-racist competencies, as well as an increased number of Black, Indigenous, and racialized people joining our federal council. And so to me, again, back to your question, Jeff, I think having that confidence in our federal council is an important part of being election ready. I'll be honest, we're not there yet. I'd like to see more change happen. An election is beginning. And so I'm optimistic, and I'll be continuing to be engaging to work towards moving towards a federal council that kind of earns that confidence again.
Mike, how does that? Sorry, Jeff. I want to jump in real quick too. I just what I want to know is how, well, first of all, have you seen any changes? Has there been any change yet? And it's been about a month. I mean, and to be fair, the Star reporter was doing what he needed to do to sell newspapers, and I don't really think that he was necessarily serving the best interests of the Green Party. He's breaking a story that was interesting to people to read, and political people like us. But how fast can a party like the Green Party move when faced with these uncomfortable truths, in comparison to other parties, which I know have more than the ability to like begin and end a conversation like this in a day?
So
They are able to, there's a problem here, you're out. And I know that there have been voices who are saying like, this is, like the leader has to come in and do this stuff. Are the wheels turning? Is there a grinding towards the kinds of changes you want to see?
first, to be clear, Alex is a journalist who's doing their job, and I respect them for the job that they're doing, and I don't hold any ill will. In fact, many would say he's doing his job well. He's uncovering a story. Second, systemic racism exists in every institution across the country, in every party, and the Green Party of Canada is not immune to it. Thirdly, we are not going to address systemic racism in the party in a matter of weeks. What I think is possible is for space to be created in the most senior levels of leadership that can give more confidence that that's the direction that we can move towards. And that I am feeling more optimistic. Again, there is an election round that's beginning. My understanding, I don't want to get the number wrong, I think it might be as many 8 or to 10 of the seats on federal council. There's a significant number of council seats. One of the 3 folks who was named in the articles that, in my view, one of the 3 that lost my confidence in their ability to lead an anti-racist way, their term is already expiring. I also want to be clear. I don't think this needs to be about naming and shaming. We said in the letter, I'll say it again, these people who've given years of volunteer service to the party, in the letter, we thank them for it. I'll say it again, I'm grateful for their service to the party. In service to the party, I no longer feel these are the people who are best positioned to lead as a result of their either inappropriate or lack of response to the allegations and the conversations that have been raised. And I think with creating space, Richard, to your question, yeah, I think that would then restore my confidence that we're in the right direction, that then there's the potential for more of the right conversations to root out systemic racism in the party, as similar conversations are being had across the country, and as well having a courageous Black woman leading the party is, to me, really exciting, and it's part of this moment for the party to recognize that there's a shift underway. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic that I think it should be. I'm told in the coming weeks the elections will open. By the end of August, they should be closing, and maybe I can come back on again at that time. We can have a recap then.
And it gets back to a bit of your democracy should be difficult statement earlier. One of the difficulties the Green Party has is they have a higher threshold for ethics in a lot of ways than a lot of other parties. And that high threshold of ethics tends to expose more problems within the party, right? You guys are airing your dirty laundry for the public, where generally the knives would have come out behind the scenes, the person would have been ejected, and then you would have heard about it 3 months later, and the party would have been unified, and that was an awful person. We got rid of them as soon as we found out, and they're already gone, right? Yeah. It's one thing for the politically engaged, the people that are following day to day. That's not the vast majority of the voting public. The vast majority of the voting public has personal issues they got to deal with well above political issues, right? How do you manage that and get to the end goal of getting your policies enacted by getting elected?
I think it starts from a place of recognizing and holding a higher respect for my neighbors. And I think that's where a lot of our political conversations have eroded, is that I think there's a lack of respect that that these actors believe that by mudslinging in the House of Commons, it's going to earn them votes, and that deep partisanship somehow appeals. And I just don't believe that to be true. What I actually heard from thousands and thousands of people is that the bar is actually particularly low. The number of people who said, just don't lie to me. That's what I'm asking for. Even if we don't agree, I don't need to, it's not a fair, we're not going to agree on everything, but can we at least have an honest conversation about it? Can you at least show up? So the fact that showing up and not lying to a person are the bar in the wider democracy, at least from folks I heard in Kitchener, to some extent, I see the bar is kind of low. To your point, it's a good example. Yes, I do feel this is the kind of democracy that that may not, if I'm honest with you, politically, it's not advantageous. But if I'm going to continue to live out my values in this, like, what's the point of any of this if I don't get to be the same person I was before I started? If I don't get to hold on to my integrity through it? If those are the political games that need to be played in order to get elected, then I should choose something else to do entirely. And I've shared with a few friends, I believe, in my experience in this process so far, this is a process that's designed to either remove the integrity from the person or remove the person with integrity from the process altogether. And so I recognize that something like the letter that Anna and I put out may be somewhat unconventional. However, I also recognize that there are people in our community that are similarly calling for this kind of change. And I think if we were to treat, again, our neighbors with a higher, with the respect that they deserve, that we can have these kinds of conversations, that nuance is possible. That's actually why I was so looking forward to this conversation. We can actually get into some of the nuance. It's not just going to be a soundbite in an article the next day that can be used to misconstrue any number of different things we might have been speaking about. This is democracy at its best. It needs to be more meaningful, more nuanced conversation. And I think there's a wider number of people who are ready for that, who are actually looking for that and hungry for it even.
I know Mike wants to, or Jeff wants to ask you, Mike, a little bit about mining. Question, I just want to close out that last section by saying, how, first of all, is it frustrating for you when you see when the scarce headlines that the Green Party gets across the country are tweaked in the negative? Because I know that I've seen that, in political situations where I'm heavily invested, and it's like, we can't buy a good headline here. I don't know what we're supposed to do. Does it bother you? Does it affect your campaign? And are you confident that this kind of stuff is behind you? I mean, I know there's we don't have to get into it right now because it's brand new, but there's Israel-Palestine stuff that's happening, and if it's happening to all the parties, that's a very passionate and difficult topic. But like, how does the Green Party, because I know how the other parties do it, they do it with a team of issues managers that like steer the ship around these dangerous waters, and they still end up wrecked on the shore. Are you frustrated when this stuff goes becomes the story about the Greens, and are you confident that you can get a campaign that doesn't get caught up in it?
Well, I have respect for the value of the media, and I'm really concerned with the number of people who look to erode confidence in the media, and so I don't want to be a part of that. I'll be honest, there's some stories in 2019, the things that may have been picked up, and the things that weren't, and I of course I wonder.
You mentioned right to choose, right? Like, so when that came out, when you brought it up right here head on, like, obviously you as a candidate going to the door, there was somebody went for the jugular and was saying, well, Green Party isn't strong on the right to choose. And so you're probably hearing that and you're going, what are you talking about? Like, I can't believe that I'm even talking about this. I can only imagine.
Richard, our office was chalked the day that happened. There was someone in a chalk outline drew a woman's body and said, you know, don't, you have no right to tell me what to do with my body. I have, as my entire life before entering into our democracy in this way, been a strong advocate of expanding access and options around women's reproductive rights. So of course that was disappointing, but I chose this. I chose to enter into our democracy in this way. And so I was fully ready and willing. We wrote a Facebook post that same day. I recognize we may have lost some votes over that. That's the reality of the partisanship of politics that I've entered into. I've joined with a party. I'm going to wear some of that. And I guess I'm just trying to say, I don't hold that against the media. I recognize that they're looking for their next story. And if as Greens, if we give them a story to tell, it's on us. So I guess let's get into the second part of the question you were asking, which is, I actually believe that some of this can be messy. And so is it all behind? Unless the party decides to hire one of these issues managers and gets into the deep partisanship and policy, which I hope we don't. And so I'm not sure that I can say that, yes, that would be the case. What I can say is that for our part in Kitchener Centre, that I think we're putting together again a kind of campaign that's going to be ready to position to win and follow on what Mike Schreiner has done in Guelph as an example. When I look at people like Aeasia and like Mike, I think these are the kinds of leaders that will continue to inspire folks and give the media reasons to put Aeasia on the cover of Maclean's, for example. So I'm going to keep focusing on what we can control. And that has me actually feeling pretty optimistic. If I look what happened in Guelph, we are tracking for exactly that same result. And, you know, when we get past some of the politics that have been the subject of a lot of this conversation, when it comes to democracy, well, I think it just takes the time to put in the work. And if somebody thinks they're going to start when the writ drops and get in touch with 100,000 people, they're kidding themselves. What instead I think it takes is years of building relationships and trust, and creating space for conversations where we're actually listening to people. You know, again, when we were knocking on doors, I'm not sure I've shared the story before, and definitely not on in this conversation. We didn't just ask, and don't. I can imagine a listener may think this may come across as naive. So let me just finish the point, I guess. A lot of folks, when they're at the door, they're saying, of course, can we count on your support? Our question was, what's important to you? And through thousands and thousands of conversations about what's important to you, we moved over time to then someone saying, can I get a lawn sign? You can count on my support, et cetera. Not that we didn't get out the vote. Of course, we were focused on getting out the vote and identifying our supporters, but we didn't start the conversation with identifying our supporters. And I hope that might be somewhat emblematic of what it can look like when we put democracy at the center, recognizing we're still part of a political system. So that's not being naive to that. But if we prioritize democracy, I think people will continue to reward the Green Party and folks like myself, community folks who are looking to represent our communities. And when I look at people like Paul Manley and Mike Schreiner and Jenica, that's the model that I think we can continue to build from. And that's what again, back to the first question, Jeff, you asked about Aeasia. That's why I think she's got a good shot in Toronto Centre. That's her community. It's where she grew up. It's where she has roots. That's how our democracy should be working, is putting folks that we believe in from our communities to represent us in Ottawa in ways that I guess we would be excited about.
So to cycle back a bit to the Green Party and then localize it to Sudbury, I had the opportunity to meet with Mike Schreiner. I've had the opportunity to meet with Elizabeth May in the past. And one of the things I've talked to them about is that every party has a perception issue, right? Doesn't matter what party it is. Yeah. And the Green Party has a perception issue of being anti-industrial, because in a lot of people's minds, green and industrial are dichotomies, right? They don't work together. And I think Sudbury in particular showcases this as false more than anything else, right?
Yeah.
For the future that's being pushed by the Green Party to come to reality, current demand for battery electric vehicles, you need 5 times as many nickel mines as exist today, right? To get to where you guys are talking, that's well beyond that. And a city that supplies mining vehicles and technology for mining and all of that would be a massive winner. Yet the Green Party isn't able to get support. And a lot of it is because people still locally in a city that should understand it better than anyone else, that industrial and green don't go together. How do you guys get past that? How do you come to a city like Sudbury and say, we're your industry's best friend?
Well, to start, I've heard all of the tropes on the Green Party now. So the opposite version of what you just finished saying is I often hear that Greens are conservatives on bicycles. So I think depending on someone's political interest, there's various mythologies or cliches that someone might put forwards to pigeonhole any one political party, and the Greens aren't immune to that. And I expect that the more influence the Greens get in the House of Commons, the more those kinds of rhetoric will continue to be heard. I think the other reality is that while I've spent some time in Sudbury before, I'm not from Sudbury. And I don't have the depth of knowledge or understanding to really grapple with the questions of how we reconcile a community whose economics has historically been connected with the mining community, and ecological wisdom being a value of the party. I do feel, though, that there is common ground to be found. I would expect that other, Greens in your community would have more substantial specifics to be sharing. I can share, the difference would be when we get into things like new fossil fuel in infrastructure. To me, that's a different conversation where the science is clear. This is not about me as a Green or you as anybody else. We just need to follow and listen to the science. And as we follow the science, we know we need to move away from net new fossil fuel infrastructure, both economically and ecologically. That would be, I guess that's kind of the paradigm that I'd want to bring to a conversation like this, Jeff. And, to Richard's point, when we were launching Green Economy North a number of years ago, I started to have some conversations with Vale and Glencore. But to think that I could, start with some of those initial conversations and relationships and, offer you too much more than that, I think it more importantly would be that we need to be protecting workers. We need to be investing in people, and we need to be investing in relationships and kind of grappling with these bigger questions. So I promise you, I'm not trying to dodge your question. I'm trying to answer it in the most honest way possible. As someone, I can only think of what someone must think when we speak about Alberta from Ontario. And I think the same way, speaking with you from Kitchener to the north, I would want to, invest in more conversations, I guess.
I just remember, Mike, heading to the NSI Evening of Recognition in my first year at Green Economy North. And I drove all the way to Niagara Falls to listen to Elizabeth May talk for an hour about Sudbury. I'm like, I know this story. I get this story. That big giant smokestack that symbolizes our community, that would be the kind of thing that would end up on like the we need cleaner air. Look at this big smokestack. That's not what we need. Is actually a symbol for the acid rain treaty and the sulfur dioxide market that Elizabeth May went on about for an hour when I drove all the way to Niagara Falls to hear about it.
Well, I mean, this is the cliche, but all politics is local, right? And there's some truth to that. When the first time we started those conversations about Green Economy North, one of the first things someone said to me was, Mike, you're not from the North. I said, yeah, you're right. That's why we're working with Rethink Green at the time, because these folks are. And so we've got a model for how to engage with businesses. They know what this community is about and they have the relationships and we trust them with that. I think that might be a similar dynamic here at play, where I hold to green values, and I hope there might be someone stepping forward in your community who can speak to translating those green values in a way that resonates for folks who are working at a mining company or in the supply chain, which I recognize is a huge part of the economy in your part of the province, right? And I don't want to say anything that would diminish that.
So this does make me want to roll back to an earlier conversation, though, right? If the party isn't able to nationalize a platform for mining, right? Because all of the politicians are local, right? And you guys don't happen to elect a Northern Ontario MP, how do you bring in the policies of a Sudbury, an Alberta, an area that isn't core to the party, and eventually grow to a place where you could be a national party?
Well, it might reflect the person you're speaking with. So I don't purport to be the leader of the Green Party of Ontario or the leader of the Green Party of Canada. And I would expect that if Anna and me were in this same conversation, I would expect more of her to go further than I've gone, to then translate party policy for the context in Sudbury or any number of other communities. So I think it might be more about where I'm coming from as a representative here in Kitchener than it reflects on the party as a whole. And I would expect more from Anna and me. And I hope that, we can talk about maybe having her join this podcast over the coming months and hear some of her reflections on that. Again, I think it goes back to what I said earlier in terms of the platform needing to resonate with a variety of communities across the country, and then having local leaders to be able to speak to it with a federal leader who can do the same.
And we would love to have Anna on the podcast. And if you want to extend that invitation, that would be amazing.
Yeah, we're game anytime, Mike. But for today, this was fantastic. I think we've hit our hour that we promised we wouldn't go over, because you've got your own Facebook Live events to get onto for tonight. So listen, on behalf of Jeff and I and all of our listeners at Sudbury Politics, thanks for taking some time again to join us in Sudbury. And I'm sure that Sudburyans appreciate having you here. And I know that I'm looking forward to sharing this with some of our old colleagues for sure.
Well, and thanks to you both for the breadth of questions and for giving space for some of the nuance as well. Like I said, this is not just fun, but I think it's what we need to be doing if we're going to be investing in our democracy, having conversations like this. So I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the space for this conversation too. So thank you both again for having me here.
Thanks. And check out Mike Morrice, MORRICE.ca. He's the Green Party candidate in Kitchener Centre. Thanks a lot.
Certainly on that, Richard, certainly for those that are, might be listening who are Green supporters, it is something that we are increasingly seeing of folks saying, well, here's a spot where Greens have got a real shot. And so if there are folks who are listening who would want to be a part of a campaign that is kind of positioned to win, who are already Green supporters, by all means, there's a number of folks from across the province who have already been contributing, and we'd love to hear from them, of course. Again, the website you shared is the best place to start.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Now, share your thoughts. Go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sudbury Politics. Let us know what you thought about the episode, and share with your friends so they can share their thoughts too. We're so glad you joined us, and we hope you tune in again for Sudbury Politics, the show.